Marvellous. So welcome to this Bartenieff Fundamental class on the principle of spatial intent. Now, there's a few things I'd like to say before we get moving, and for those of you who don't know me and it's your first session with me, welcome, great, thanks for coming. Now, the work of Laban and Bartenieff is very mixed together. Irmgard Bartenieff studied with Laban in Europe before she migrated to North America, and whilst this series of classes is framed as the Bartenieff Fundamental Principles, they are absolutely embedded and enmeshed with the work of Laban within the framework of the Laban-Bartenieff Movement System, which I teach. But the principle of spatial intent really speaks to Laban's interest in space. And one of the words he used or kind of coined to think about the space of movement is the kinesphere. So for some of you, this word will be new, and for some, you'll be like, yes, the kinesphere, I know exactly what this is. Now, irrespective of that, the kinesphere is the space around your body, starting from the inside, from the inner sphere, to the far reaches of your movement, of your limbs, all the way around you, the furthest you can go. So that's all the potential of your kinesphere. And then beyond there, as if that's a bubble around you, beyond that is referred to as the general space. And we're going to be today working with the kinespheric space because we can map it and have language for it in a particular way that basically gives us more awareness and choice of where our movement is going, where it is traveling in our kinesphere. And that's about it. Body in space today. Where are we going? Where are the pathways? Where are the reach spaces? Where are the zones? Where are the levels? And I said it in my email, but I'll say it again. Sometimes considering this category of space and spatial intent can become quite a cognitive process of thinking. And I'd like us to know that that's kind of can be what happens as you're conceptualizing a bit of directions, but to always drop back into the body's experience and the felt sense of it, which is why we refer to the inner sphere as well. So space isn't outside of you, it's starting within, let's say. Okay, now before we get going, I'm just going to show you my very useful model of the day, my tennis ball. So you will see I have drawn a line around the tennis ball, and at the moment you're viewing it with a division of the upper part of the tennis ball and the lower part. So we can think about if the tennis ball was my kinesphere, which is impossible because like really a sphere, like anatomically, it's quite hard to really shape because my limbs only work in certain directions. There's always a limitation of this mapping of a geometrical form onto my body, but let's play with it. Here we have a divide of the upper and the lower part of the kinesphere. And I can think about my kinesphere relative to my vertical alignment, maybe around my middle, around my belly button, something like that might be my identifying feature of where I make that spatial divide. So I can make it upper and like low, high zone and low zone. I can talk about the right zone and the left zone, depending on which way you're looking at this. And I can also think about a front zone and a back zone. It's like terribly thrilling looking at a tennis ball. So rather than just looking at it, we'll get into the moving of that. But that language will come in useful later when you start to embody those as explorations. So if you're not already muted, please go ahead and mute yourself. And if anyone has any questions about that, obviously just wave at me and go, say that word again, kinesphere. So first of all, a little game to wake up the space around ourselves. I'd like you to choose any direction around yourself, look there, and then click where you've looked. So you first of all look, and then you click. You look, and you click. And you look. And your game is to get into all the spaces around yourself as much as possible. So off you go in your own way. Looking, clicking, looking, clicking, looking, clicking, looking, clicking. And you might change hands. And you might not be super quick at first, that's fine. But this for me is like warming up my kinesthetic, warming up the spaces around me. And warming up my sense of eyes and hands. So eyes go first and click follows. Sometimes the click might go first. Using this to really just warm up the space around you. And it might be quite far away from you, might be quite near. And then let's change it to click, then look. And see if you can get a bit quicker. If this is like really easy for you, speed up. Can you still breathe? As you challenge yourself to go a little bit quicker. And you might be shifting weight, you might find a little bit of travelling around the space if you've got room to travel in. Great, and then the third round of this we'll do in a minute. But just take a little moment to pause, close your eyes, and sense what you sense in standing or sitting. So no longer using the sense of sight. What has that little task already awoken in your sensation? In your sense of your weight, fluidity of your body, the different parts of your body. And gently open your eyes and let's make it the kind of simpler version of looking and clicking at the same time. And as you do this time really pay attention to the reach space of this gesture, whether it's far, mid, or near. Whether you're using opposite hands each time or crossing your midline. You might even find yourself on the ground. And in fact, if you haven't made your way down to the ground, do so. And we'll come to sit. So many of you will be familiar with this little heel rock, but let's think about it in terms of its space. So just with your legs out long, take a rock on the heel bones, flexing, extending through the ankle joints to send a rock through your pelvis. So we have more of this forward and back motion in the lower body. And maybe the head can nod a little bit. And then once you've established that movement, pop it on the ground, take a rock through the heels, feeling this inner connection of the space between the heels and through the central axis of your body, more or less. Through all of the pelvis, in front of the spine, through to the top of the skull. So right now we have a spatial emphasis headwards and tailwards. And in this work, we take the space of the body as the space that we'll speak about. So rather than using the room as the kind of map of the movement here. As I think of rocking towards my head as I'm lying on the ground, I'm actually thinking of my high zone through the skull, my low zone through the feet, even though I'm in the low zone of the room. But that gets a little bit murky in a minute, but that's okay. So, lying on your back right now, movement is very much available in the front zone of your kinesphere. Remembering that split of the tennis ball, here we can think of all of the back surface being really contained by the floor, and my movement now can be revealing the front zone of my kinesphere. So in your own way, take some easy movements, sensing all of the space of this front zone of your kinesphere, and you might find quite a lot of the limbs mobilizing in space, this kind of far reach of really how far can you go right to the edges of your kinesphere. But you might also include the front of the spine, maybe even pelvis or head, moving into that front zone of the kinesphere. And if it helps to close your eyes, feel free to do so. Any movement you like, to sense this space in front of you. It's not just one line, it's the whole zone. And you can bring that to sitting when you're ready. As to what the front zone might give you. So it's up to you how you move, whatever movement you wish to explore. And you're imagining this sort of split down your body that says, okay, I'm not going to move in the back zone, it's going to stay in the front zone of my kinesphere, and whatever I want that to be can be there. So the front zone has a bit of high in it, has a bit of low in it, has a bit of right, has a bit of left also. Nice. And then let's lie on one side. I'm lying on my right side. Maybe it will be helpful for you also to lie on your right. And again, like activating the front zone, I'm really going to close off the left side, the right side, by lying on it. So I can go ahead and visualize this left zone of my kinesphere and mobilize myself into that. So my left zone of kinesphere has a bit of forward and back in it. And it has a bit of high and low in it. What is the movement possible in this left zone of kinesphere? And then at a certain moment, I can come up and carry on exploring the left zone of my kinesphere. But I might be very strict with myself that the right side doesn't get involved. It doesn't start to become shown. But I could still take my right side into my left side if I wanted to. So there is a game I'm playing with myself of trying not to go into the right side. Trying to open up the potential of the zone on the left side. And I might take that to standing, weight shift into it. Bring hands and feet into this exploration of where the movement can take place. But also remembering how head might travel into that side, side of spine might travel in. And so trying not to find any movement into that left zone, right zone. So it's as if it's kind of just not part of the expression. But of course it becomes it because you've not been there for some time. If this is some sort of choreographic experiment, it would start to become quite obvious that the thing you're not moving into is also part of the communication.
Ali, is it you're using the left side or you're moving into the left side?
Moving into the left side. So my right side can travel into the left zone of my kinesphere.
Oh, okay. And
be showing the directions that are possible, the zone that is that whole side. And I can do it with this side, and I can also do it with this side. Yeah, good question, thank you. Come back to the middle, take a little pause, take a little shake. So we've explored front zone and left. Take a moment of recuperation. So in the Laban Bartenieff Movement System, we work with these thematic pairs. I've talked about this before, but I'll say it again. Exertion and recuperation. So we're doing quite a lot of exerting, thinking through this lens of spatial intent and zone of kinesphere. Recuperation could mean rest, could mean doing nothing, could mean something else that's not that. So do whatever you'd like to do to recuperate for another 30 seconds. Maybe closing your eyes, maybe connecting into the three-dimensionality of your body through some touch. Maybe finding a little bit more of an inner attention after all this kind of inner-outer attention. And wherever you are, let's activate the right zone of the kinesphere. So you might be moving in a very small way into that right side. Maybe not even using limbs, but finding even just a little weight shift that keeps emphasizing, reiterating the right zone. And then you might find more movement starting to explore what's possible in that right zone of the kinesphere that has, as I say, a kind of forward right, and back right, and a right high in it, and a right low in it, but all the directions in between those. And depending on the space around you, that might travel a little bit. And you might find yourself doing something that's pretty unfamiliar, that you don't normally move like this. That's fine. You might find some more familiar movement. Oh yeah, okay. Right side of the kinesphere. And let's shift the attention to the back zone of the kinesphere. So it might help to start on your front surface, so you're kind of switching off the access to the front zone because you're on the floor. So you can find, obviously, where the legs can go, where the arms and the spine might go. How the spine might curl into the back zone. So you have the space more above your head and the space more towards your feet here. Left, back, right, back. And then when you're ready, taking that into a different base of support. So now the game is to not come forward to express the front zone of the kinesphere, but to keep showing, revealing the back zone of your kinesphere. And you might feel like you move into it and then get a bit stuck, and so you might want to reverse that movement. Find it easing to the other side. Traveling a little bit into that back zone of kinesphere. And if you turn into it, you might end up showing the front zone of your kinesphere if your pelvis joins in. So you can turn your head for a little bit, but there is this sense of keeping the pelvis and the pelvic core and the chest a little bit more in the alignment that you're working with as normally in standing. And tasting those moments of going, oh, okay, back zone becoming front zone. So staying busy with the back zone, however makes sense to you. What happens if you find yourself balancing on one leg? So would you say now that the front zone is in front of you? Well, maybe, that's, these ideas are here as a toolbox for playing and exploring, not the kind of space harmony police that's got to come out and go, oh no, you moved into the front zone. So it's an opportunity to see where your movement can occupy. Surprising yourself a little. In music, it would be like doing lots of scales, warming up the range. Okay, let's take the attention now to the low zone. So from our ball, it's this sense of the split through maybe where navel center is or around the level of the diaphragm. And we can stay standing to explore, okay, what is this low zone that I can explore that has a right and a left in it, has a back and a front in it. And my limbs can go there, and my head can go there a little bit. And I can really emphasize the stretch between my legs. That is part of your kinesphere. If you're sitting, then your low zone is somehow expressible through the height change of your spine. How can spine go into the low zone? Maybe even backwards. Oh, not very far for me, but I can think about it. Intend it. And if moving really vigorously is like too exerting, just turn the volume down. You can still be exploring the low zone of the kinesphere slowly with small movements that just go, here I am in the low zone. And now let's shift the attention to the high zone, so from navel center up. And I'm starting with jumping, but you don't have to start that. It helps me to feel, again, the space above me, the space above my head. And I might think of the space that's back and high, right and high, left and high, with my limbs crossing each other. And I might also think about how I can get my legs into the high zone. And again, they might not go very high, but it's the sense of the intent to go upwards into the high zone. It might be new in your movement experience, or maybe familiar. So we've done front zone, back zone, left zone, right zone, low zone, high zone. And take a moment to revisit the zone that you found something interesting in. And maybe you found something interesting in all of them, but go back to that place where you were, oh yeah, I didn't know I could do that. Where you maybe surprised yourself. So having a little move in that zone. Back to that menu on the buffet table, that particular dish. Because even though we can kind of all maybe see the same use of space, our individual experience of it might be very personal. And this is what I mean about the experience of sensing into space. How that communicates something to you as well as outwards. Okay. Right, let's find the click look action again, with looking and clicking at the same time. And maybe there's a little bit more available to you where you can differentiate between the zones. And I'm going to suggest that every time you click, you go back to arms down. So it comes, it's a central pathway from navel center out or navel center wherever, and then you come back to kind of arms by your side. So we'll practice this central pathway in the kinesphere, which means traveling from or initiated from the center of the body or passing through the center of the body. I'm going to switch it to a peripheral pathway. So if you make a click, traveling on the edge. And that edge could be at the far reach of your kinesphere. And you see the distance, like my elbow isn't bending, there's a relatively similar distance from my click to my core the whole time, but I can still find an edge at a nearer reach. I just don't change it within the time of the playing around with this one. So the peripheral pathway is describing an edge, but it's not changing the distance between the action, or the periphery of the action and my core. See, very easy to add in a central pathway. You give yourself the experience of traveling on the periphery of your kinesphere, and you can leave the clicking if you like and find it with other parts of the body. You might find it with the legs. Maybe you find it with the knee, peripheral pathway of the knee, arcing here, foot. So there's a difference between the central pathway and the peripheral pathway. You could find that with your head as well. And you could also try and find a central pathway with your head, but not quite so easy. But the pathways that we use mostly in dancing and in everyday communication are the transverse pathways, which are not necessarily staying on an edge and not necessarily always passing through the center of the body, but happening in all of this in-between space of the periphery of the far reach of your kinesphere and your body's core. So earlier when we were exploring the zones, we were in this transverse movement and transverse pathways quite a lot. And that's where we tend to be. So if you go back to the clicking and the looking, not coming through the center and not staying on the edge, you might find yourself traveling more in this transverse space. Cool. So I've kind of just left you to your own devices to play, but now is maybe a moment if anyone has anything they want to share or any questions before we take this into a little bit more of the Bartenieff Fundamental kind of exercises. I'd just be curious if anyone has any questions or any discoveries, any like, oh, I loved my right zone, I did not like my left zone. I never used the back zone. If anyone wants to share something, now's a good moment.
Could you further explain the two pathways you just sort of mentioned?
Yeah, sure. I mentioned three and I mentioned them really quickly. So central pathways. Starting from or passing through the center of my body in any direction. Could be here. But a central pathway is this one that has a trajectory through my body's core. Peripheral pathways describing an edge of my kinesphere, and often it's taught as being a far reach experience, because that's where you sense it more clearly. But actually, I would argue that a peripheral pathway is still possible at a mid reach of the kinesphere, or even the near reach. I'm making an edge of with my nose, tracing a little pathway in space. And then the third pathway, the transverse, all of those pathways that are occurring between the far reach of my kinesphere, my center, maybe passing through my center as well. And so those pathways have a lot more changes of their trajectory, a lot more of this sense of the three-dimensionality of my body's form. Yeah, there's something about visiting all the different potential spaces that you might possibly want to move in before moving into them. And this kind of work about taking yourself off your center is that sense of kind of visiting your kinesphere, so that then you know that that's there for 5 minutes later. It sounds ridiculous, but the way that you move when you first get out of bed in the morning, when you haven't been moving in your kinesphere, is quite a different experience to even half an hour later, just about how you visit the space around you. Cool. Any other thoughts or questions, especially about these zones? If you feel like things are getting really exerting or blocked, slow down, chill out, take a break, pause, close your eyes and be like, okay, where is moving? Where am I wanting to move into? What's next? Take the pressure off doing the exercise and just be like, I will recuperate however I want to recuperate. Cool. So, something a little quieter. We will explore the sagittal pelvic shift. Now, before we do the sagittal pelvic shift as the BF exercise, I'd like us to just explore the sagittal dimension and the sagittal plane. Sagittal dimension, if we think of it in geometrical terms, is simply a forward and back dimension, and we can think of it relative to our body's height. If I stand on my 2 feet, I have a right and a left, and I have front and back, and I can just think of the sagittal axis here. I can walk along this sagittal dimension, I can gesture with it, on it, with my limbs. So rather than now thinking of the whole of the front zone, which could be any of these, I'm being quite specific about one notion of forwardness. And I'm taking it from my middle today, but it doesn't have to be. So you can all stand up and just play with that simplicity of forward and back. How the whole of the front surface of the body can travel forward, backwards. We might think of the forehead, maybe the sternum, pubic symphysis, kneecaps, travelling forward. And maybe the back of skull, back of sacrum, thoracic spine, travelling backwards. And a dimension has one single spatial pull. The sagittal dimension has, well, it has 2 equal spatial pulls, sorry, forward and backward. There we go. Now a plane, the sagittal plane, has 2 unequal spatial pulls. The primary spatial pull is this forward and back one, but we're going to add on a little bit of the vertical dimension, so the up, down. So we can have forward and high, and backwards and high. So if I stand to the side, you'll see how I can have forward and high, and backward and high, but I'm still emphasizing more the forwardness into my lump and backwards, but with a little bit of a height change as well. And then I can find from my sagittal plane, I can find forward and low. I can have it with my hands, I can indicate that forward and low space. Take my pelvis there, pubic bone, and I can find backwards and low. And the primary spatial pull is the backwards, but I'm adding a little sinking to find the back and the low. And so I can find the crosses, the diametrical crosses from forward low to back high, finding a central pathway to do this. I can find forward high to back low, forward high, back low. I might take you all the way to the ground if I wanted to. So sagittal plane, like a rectangle, that has more of the forward than the high, that has a little change, and back and low. So let's apply that to sagittal pelvic shift. This is the Bartenieff Fundamental exercise, that is a shift of the body's centre, where the pelvic core is travelling forward and high, and then coming back forward low, and then coming back high. What do I mean? So I'm going to carry my pelvis off the ground and towards my heels. And so at the same time, and the journey is going to look like this, and then come back down again. Pretty simple. Now, try it really big if you want to start with, like where pelvis can go very forward, very high. But you're going to, at a certain point, really feel your hamstrings and it'll be very tiring. Here is a movement that is classically very small. But first of all, if it helps to get the lift of the pelvis and the sense of traveling towards your heels at the same time, like launching the pelvis forward low and bringing it back high, go ahead and just make it small. And unlike Pilates or yoga, try not to scoop your pelvis underneath you. So you're keeping the bowl of the pelvis parallel with the ceiling and simply carrying pelvis forward high a little bit, and then putting it back down. So you're not tipping through the pelvis to get back. And it might help to take an exhale, So little reach through pelvis. And then inhale to lengthen the spine to bring you back to the ground. Try and do it at a different angle so you can see it with a slightly different organisation. My heels are very close to my pelvis and I'm not using my hands to pull me. I'm feeling a pouring of the weight into my feet and into my chest, softening and yielding the whole back surface. As I exhale, navel center is descending in the direction of gravity, and there's a gentle lift through pelvic floor. But largely, I'm trying to not grip through my thighs, trying to use as minimal effort possible in order to access the deeper postural muscles. Now, if you do a lot of them, at a certain point, it'll get quite heavy and quite tiring. So take a break, take a shake, recuperate.
Sorry, Ali, just to clarify,
Yes.
when you said to not scoop the pelvis, so
Yeah.
is that going from like a neutral position or the curved position?
So as your pelvis is lying on the ground already, there is a space under the spine, but largely it's not overarched and it's not super disappeared, so it's kind of neutral in that sense.
Oh, okay, so keep it.
Yeah, and then when you lift, that isn't going anywhere. It's not tucking under to get there, and it's not arching to get there either.
Okay.
It's just keeping the pelvis in the same position, that limbs are carrying it forward high and putting it back low. There is a little bit of a tip on the way back, but you're trying to find the possibility of differentiating pelvis and thigh bones. So the little bit so we remember the ball and socket joints are being mobilized here as this action is. Have a little play, see what happens. And don't hang out there, don't do a sagittal pelvic shift there and wait forever. It's going to get quite heavy on the legs. Okay, that's enough of that. We'll come back to it in a minute. But now, please, let's take an arc of the knee and we'll take a thigh lift. So the classic Bartenieff Fundamental thigh lift. Exhaling, softening into the hip sockets, navel center descends, floating the knee up. So here we have an arcing pathway, peripheral pathway of the knee around the hip socket. So floating the knee up. And there's two ways of bringing it back down again. One is more passive, so you inhale and allow the foot to fall. So a result of the diaphragm moving the organs, moving the leg, can be quite useful to feel the weight of your leg in this way. Or you can feel the sitting bone with your fingertips, and you can imagine that bone also arcing, taking a peripheral pathway to bring the heel down. So sensing into the tissues of the body. Feeling the back zone of the kinesphere supported. And finding this arcing peripheral pathway of the knee. You might even feel a little bit of spatial intent of the supporting foot into the ground. But you're not wanting to give it so much attention that the lift of the thigh absolutely comes from the press of the opposite foot. We're still trying to activate through the psoas on that right side to lift the right leg. But you might find a bit of counter tension or spatial intent through the opposite foot. It can be an interesting experience there. Especially if you feel like one foot has a stronger response to that idea. It's like, oh, I can really press off my right foot to lift my leg, but actually I don't find it so easy to press through my left, for example. So the BF exercises, if you feel like you're just going through the motions at a certain point, change something. So they're a template in order to explore.
And if you're tensing around the knee, does that sound like you're doing what you're trying to do, or does it sound like you're activating something else?
Tensing in the knee.
Around the knee, the muscles like gripping the knee.
It feels like you're sort of drawing your knee towards your thigh to lift it. Could you think instead of lifting the foot and actually taking a peripheral pathway through the foot, that might change something about the use of the muscles in the knee? Yeah, great. So this is the game with this work. You choose to place your attention somewhere else or somewhere to see what changes. Let's add thigh lift to sagittal pelvic shift. What do I mean by that? So, sagittal pelvic shift, thigh lift, return from thigh lift, return from sagittal pelvic shift. So many words for a small movement. Sagittal pelvic shift, thigh lift, return from thigh lift, return from sagittal pelvic shift. So, hopefully you can see me, there's enough light. Sagittal pelvic shift, and I'm making it quite big as I show it now. Sagittal pelvic shift, thigh lift, return from thigh lift, return from sagittal pelvic shift. But again, if you feel like you're starting to strain things, like the question we just had was, don't feel like you need to do so many of them. Notice whether you can give a little bit more weight to the rib cage, so you're not having to hold yourself to do this through some binding or tension through the upper body. You can soften through the spine here. Allow the weight of the skull to be brought by the pelvis. Pubic bone, tailbone, sequencing through spine to lengthen through the skull. Okay. So last week I had a question about getting up off the floor. So we were doing some work about transitioning from sitting to lying. Now let's find sitting to standing, and let's use the sagittal pelvic shift and the thigh lift. What do I mean? So, first of all, we can practice in sitting, finding a little heel rock to bring the pelvis towards the heels. Now, your arms might not be super long like mine are, they're very long, so it's very helpful because I've got the ground quite at my disposal. You might need to, bend more of your body to get there. Play around with bringing pelvis to heels. Now, if you're on carpet, you're just going to have to lift a little bit. That's absolutely fine. As you do this, refine that sense of the sagittal, and when you feel like you've got it, look up. Give yourself something to look at. I can see a leaf on the tree and I will go towards it. So you're giving yourself somewhere in space to activate, that's where I want to go. Now if your knees start to complain, I'll give you another version, but for now we'll stay with this sagittal, like homologous lower pattern. Eventually, we're going to take sagittal pelvic shift over the heels. Again, it works with your architecture, but I can push myself there, my hands can go, and then I can come up to here. If that's not working for you, let's go around the side. That's also possible. We've got just more of a lateral pelvic shift in there. So we're nearly there. Going to add these pieces together. Sagittal pelvic shift, thigh lift, and then you can step onto that foot. It's very exciting, or at least it is to me. Sagittal pelvic shift, thigh lift, and you're walking. Except I leave the frame. So, sagittal pelvic shift, thigh lift, carry on walking. And this is going to be a lot easier if you use spatial intent forward high in that sagittal dimension, in that sagittal plane that we were just playing with. And it might help that you feel a pull of the space or a push of the space behind you, your back zone of your kinesphere traveling underneath. And then when you're walking, you can just enjoy walking and then find your way back to the ground and have another go. So, sagittal pelvic shift, thigh lift, thigh lift. And walking is a thigh lift, right? And sagittal pelvic shift is you step onto each foot that's taking place. And if you've been finding a thigh lift always with the right thigh, give yourself the opportunity to find the left. So some of you, I can see it's working pretty well. Give yourself the opportunity to feel that weight shift onto the supporting foot, so you don't just lead with your chest. Try and bring your pelvis with you. So there's some spatial intent through the pubic symphysis, through the pubic bone, to bring you up off the floor. And absolutely feel that forward high pull through forehead, through sternum, through tailbone. You might even think of it through the back of the skull, rib cage coming forward high. And depending on the space you're in, give yourself something to be motivated by, that you're going to go towards. So Bartenieff developed these exercises to help children with polio literally get out of bed and find walking. And she did that through activating and stimulating their inner motivation and intent. And with children, you can wave, hold a toy, you know, there's this like, yeah, I want to go towards that, you know. So allow that to come into your exploration so it makes it fun for yourself and not just, I have to get up off the ground because she said so. Okay. Give yourself some recuperation. Maybe finding heel rock. And maybe a little rolling. Bringing your attention a little bit more to the inner space. Contents of the body, contents of the skin. And from where you are, turn your head. See that you're using and activating the front zone of your kinesphere. Just by using your eyes to see the space, to scan. You can bring yourself out of the ground. And let's gather for another check-in, chat, question time.